Good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure this morning to introduce Dr. Bryan Carter. Bryan Carter is not physically here right now. He's in Cleveland, but he will be appearing to us via hologram, apparently. Dr. Bryan Carter received his PhD at the University of Missouri-Columbia and is currently the director of the Center for Digital Humanities and an associate professor in Africana Studies here at the University of Arizona. He specializes in African American literature of the 20th century with a primary focus on the Harlem Renaissance. His research also focuses on digital humanities, Africana studies. He has published numerous articles on his doctoral project, Virtual Harlem, which is an immersive representation of a portion of Harlem, New York, as it existed during the 1920s Jazz Age and the Harlem Renaissance. Dr. Carter's research centers on how the use of traditional and advanced interactive and immersive technologies changed the dynamic within the learning space. Dr. Carter has completed his first book entitled Digital Humanities, Current Perspectives, Practice, and Research with Emerald Publishing, and has just completed his second manuscript with Routledge Press entitled Afrofuturism, Experiencing Culture Through Technology, and that should be coming out on June 22nd. His current work also led to exploring the African American expatriate experience through immersive and augmented technologies using handheld devices and wearable technologies. So, Dr. Carter.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Bryan Carter. I'm an associate professor in the Africana Studies program and the director of the Center for Digital Humanities. To the conference organizers, I want to first of all thank you so very much for the invitation to speak to this esteemed body. The other keynote presentations are amazing, and I just hope that this keynote will contribute to that conversation in just some small way. To Professor Wu, thank you very, very much for recommending me to be a part of this. I very much appreciate your ongoing support. Now, for everyone else here, this is going to be a bit of an interactive keynote, a little bit different than what you may be expecting or what you may have experienced in the past. So if you haven't already done so, please go ahead and take your cameras out, put it on photo mode because you'll be scanning a couple of QR codes here in just a few moments, okay? Not the very first one because that's one that we scanned in order to get the hologram up and running, but we'll talk about that in just a little while. So the title of this presentation, I've expanded just a little bit than the one that you have in your program to be A New Level of Presence, Spatial, Digital Humanities, and Volumetric and Holographic Video Capture and Broadcast. Now that's a long title, I know, but it's one that is more encompassing than the original title because I think that what we're going to talk about today has much wider ramifications to not only our conference theme, but to also perhaps some of the individual research that many of you may happen to be doing or that you may be curious about with regards to the digital humanities. So first of all, let's get into just a few of the basics. Who am I? My name is Bryan Carter, as you already know. I'm from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I served for 10 years in the United States Air Force as an administrative assistant, mostly playing football and doing some other things that wouldn't necessarily make you think that someone was in the Air Force. But I did serve the country in some very interesting places. Hawaii, Japan, and Italy. It was really an amazing experience. I taught high school for a couple of years here in Arizona, interestingly enough, right after I got out of the military in Globe, Arizona. I was the first African-American teacher that was there in the middle school. And then I taught in Mountain Point High School in the Phoenix Tempe High School District. I also then went to the University of Missouri-Columbia, where I earned my PhD, and then taught for about 14 years at the University of Central Missouri. And I've been here for the last 10 years as an associate professor in the Africana Studies program. Now, one of the things that really sort of shapes my trajectory and part of the trajectory of this particular talk is the work that I started during my PhD program with one of the most interesting projects I've worked on and probably one of the most long-lasting projects, and that's one you're going to hear about a little later, but it's called Virtual Harlem. It's a representation of a portion of Harlem, New York as it existed in the 1920s jazz age. It's been on ongoing support and evolution, I guess you could say, since about 1997. We'll talk about that here in just a little bit. Part of what also has shaped my trajectory here just a bit is being invited as a professor invité at the University of Paris for the Sorbonne. This is when I was still an assistant professor at the University of Central Missouri, and it's one that really helped me understand not only a bit more about French culture, but also helped me open my eyes a bit with regards to how my own research on the Harlem Renaissance really connected to African Americans in Paris and led to a very, very interesting set of classes as well as a field trip that I take students on every year to Paris. I also I believe wholeheartedly that as a result of some of these very early experiences, that's really led me to be a proponent of experiential learning. Now, when I think about experiential learning, it's more than just having students experience something. It's having students experience something, and through that experience, they then reinforce the learning that we're trying to present to them in the classroom. It also then helps them present their understanding of that learning in a very, very different way, particularly when we infuse a bit of digital technologies into that experiential learning situation. I also understand that because of all of these experiences that I've been, a part of, that African American literature, at least now in my classes, is experienced in a very different way. I mean, when I came through grade school and middle school and high school, the little bit of African American lit that was taught to me in a way that really didn't let me connect with it, or it didn't encourage me to connect with it. In fact, there was so little of that connection that I didn't really get a lot of exposure to literature from my own culture until I got to college, and that's a shame. So I think that even though I'm a college professor, and even though our students are here and they're learning about African American lit sometimes for the very first time, or at least adding to those very first experiences, that by teaching it to them in the most innovative ways has a lifelong effect, and I'm very much a proponent of that. Now, all of those things actually led to my being the director of the Center for Digital Humanities here. Not only the innovative ways that I was teaching and engaging students through digital technologies, but also through the ways that we've been helping other faculty members through their digital endeavors and looking at helping to build various ways that faculty members can be empowered by these particular types of technologies. So when I think about the Center for Digital Humanities, we first of all then of course have to understand what digital humanities is. It's not just one thing. Where it's an outgrowth of humanities computing, where those that were a part of the early days of digital humanities and humanities computing really started off with doing things with like textual analysis and understanding different ways to not only analyze a text, but also different ways to critique a text as a result of that analysis. Digital humanities has expanded so much since then. You're going to see just a few examples of that here in just a moment, which is why this talk is called Spatial Digital Humanities. But this center here at the university was founded in 2017. I was its initial director, and I wanted this center to really solve some of the problems that I experienced when I was a younger professor. When I would get grants, I'd then have to go out and find a group or an organization or some developers that would be able to put my project together and deliver to me in some way that I'd be able to use it or use it as a part of maybe a grant submission or something like that. I wanted this center to be able to not only do that, if necessary, but more importantly, empower those professors so that they would know more about how their own project was put together. They would be able to speak about it. They'd be able to write about it, propose about it in very different ways because they had more insight as to how their own project was assembled. I also wanted this center to be able to assist faculty members with grant writing, because I know that's such a very important part of the professor experience, especially at a Research One institution. And finally, I wanted my professors to not only know about how their project was assembled, but also have some empowerment with regards to knowing about the technologies that help put their project together. So that way, if they ever did want to know a little bit about maybe coding or 3D modeling or 360 videography or whatever the case might be, at least they would be on the right track to empower themselves. So faculty development is a huge part of this particular center. Last but not least, and this is probably one of the most important aspects of this space, and probably because of some of my earlier experiences with attending some digital humanities conferences where I'd look around and I was the only person that looked like me, or one of a few people that looked like me, and each of us would make a beeline across the room to make sure we spoke to one another, because it was a lonely experience in some respects. So being a person of color, I wanted to make sure that communities of color, underrepresented communities that often don't necessarily have technical support or any sort of technical assistance with their programming or with their research or with any of their community outreach, that this center would be able to help empower those communities, so they would be able to maybe get grants or get some other sort of public assistance, or at least empower their own communities in the most engaging ways possible. So those are some of the things I wanted to make sure that this center adopted. Now, we started in a very small set of rooms, a couple of rooms over in the Harville building here on campus. We had a couple of computers. I had a graduate student, one undergraduate assistant, and we really were borrowing programmers from other units on campus, because I knew this was going to be big, and we were awarding faculty members small developmental grants, and we were trying to put together a program that not only would be self-sustaining, which was one of the mandates when I was given this position, but also I wanted to empower our students and expose more students to this amazing idea that I had with the center with regards to being able to encourage students to be able to work on these kinds of real-world projects, how they would be able to then empower faculty members and communities, underserved communities particularly, with these new technologies, but also how they would be able to take their often STEM-oriented talents and apply them to humanistic endeavors in ways that they'd never before imagined. So you can only imagine that when students start to work with these communities, they're like, wow, I had no idea that my computing skills, or that my graphic arts skills, or that my animation skills, or that my videography skills could do this or that, right? It was really, really an interesting experience. So you can see here that we began using a number of technologies, VR being just one of them. This is one of our early visitors to the center that was checking out the Virtual Harlem project. We've since moved into a much larger space over in the Modern Language Building. We've got not only a large space that encompasses a volumetric capture stage, we have a holographic capture stage, we do videos production, we do 360 videography and digital scanning. There's a Timmy robot wandering around the space. There are all kinds of VR headsets and AR headsets and all things that are digital typically happen here. And so when I think about the ways that students are now able to not only be exposed to some of the best equipment on campus, but and then couple that with their amazing STEM technology training that they get in their classroom, and that book training is fantastic for learning how to do coding and learning how to do things by the book. But when you think about then applying that to a real world activity, it is really an amazing experience for students. And you can see in the bottom video here how that volumetric capture stage works. And I'll tell you a little bit about that later on, because it's really a part of one of the most special aspects of this particular lab. Now, when I started this center, I worked with a colleague of mine, Dr. Ken McAllister, and we established not only a vision but also a mission for this center that's so very key to not only attracting and going after various grants, but also the types of projects that we work on. We wanted this center to, of course, align with the university's mission of being globally aware, with the college's mission of being globally centric and globally aware and looking at life around the globe through a humanistic lens. We wanted to be purposefully inclusive. We wanted to make sure that not only do we include underserved communities at the table when we're applying for various grants that might affect those particular communities, but we also try to empower those communities as well as attract underserved students and underrepresented students to be a part of the development teams here in this center. Because often when we're at a PWI, sometimes those opportunities just don't necessarily filter out to all students on campus. We wanted to be computationally powered. Now, this is one of the most important things because, of course, digital humanities, the term digital implies that we've got some aspects of computational capabilities here. But when I say computationally powered, I wanted to make sure that we had some of the best stuff on campus, that we're not just dealing with last year's equipment or even our current equipment technologies. Yes, we've got some of that, but we really want to push the limits. We want to take things to that next level because somebody's got to do it. And when you're at a Research 1, you're almost expected to do that, to continue to add to the conversation about anything within your field. But when you're dealing with digital humanities, where the perception by some of those in other areas is that the humanities doesn't generate data, doesn't do any real research, well, we want to turn that upside down, right on its head, because we do real research here in the humanities, as many of you already know. And then, of course, we are humanistically motivated. We wanted to make sure that everything that we do, those individuals coming from those STEM fields, that they knew that even though they might be hardcore computer science or biotechnology or whatever the case might be, that when they come in these doors, they're going to be looking at their fields through an entirely different lens, one that is definitely humanistically oriented. Our mission statement, very, very similar and very much in support of not only the college's mission statement, but also that of the university. We wanted to make sure that we are diversity oriented and that this incubator allows those diverse student developers to not only apply their talents in a very different way, but also bring those diverse experiences to the developmental table, where we then generate whole new ideas that may not have come out of a table or a brainstorming situation if everyone at the table looks the same way. Of course, we are globally inclusive, and humanistically and humanities knowledge making is part of what we do here. We wanted to make sure that those voices from the margin have an amplifier in order to make sure that they've got a voice already. We don't have to give them a voice, but we ought to make sure that that voice is as loud and as inclusive as everybody else's voice in the room, so that it can be heard on the same level playing field. Our digital humanities initiatives are amazing, and the ways that we're including and exposing students to these digital humanities initiatives is not just exposing them to the ways that they can incorporate their STEM-oriented talents through a humanistic lens and applying those to maybe underserved communities and projects, but also the ways that they might think about then how that particular talent might then, and that exposure might then expose them to different career paths that they never even imagined, which is one of the really, really exciting things that I see in this particular center. And last but not least, we wanted to make sure that we provided a place where scholarly endeavors, where creative endeavors, where educational support to our faculty and to our students could take place in a diverse, transdisciplinary environment that was like no other on campus. So the opportunities here at the Center for Digital Humanities include internships. They include independent study opportunities. They also include undergraduate student developer and graduate student developer opportunities that are paid here at the center, because as I mentioned, we work on real world projects, and often those real world projects come with real world dollars. And so I'm going to be able to employ, I think currently we have about 28 students working with us, and we're currently working with about 21 real world projects. So it's really quite an amazing set of projects, some of which you'll hear about today. So when we first established this center, we needed to establish a space that not only where these opportunities would grow out of all of this technology that's here, but also that it would be able to sustain itself after, say, a number of years through grants and through various paid projects. I wish I could get an endowment so I wouldn't have to worry about all those grants. But realistically, you got to imagine that these kinds of centers have to support themselves in some way, shape, or form. And if we're not getting support enough to pay 28 students and to upgrade equipment and to pay subscriptions, we've got to do that another way. And so we do that through our various grant writing, and we've been fairly successful at that. And we've been successful at that because we've been able to do all of these different things with our students that have enabled us to apply for different types of grant opportunities. Ones that deal with internships, bringing, say, Native American students here on campus and encouraging them in very creative ways to get into, say, STEM fields. So there are National Science Foundation grants for that. There are digital humanities grants for a number of these opportunities here that I think are really quite exciting that can occur here in a space when you have the technology and the motivation to be able to do something like that. You can create numerous funding opportunities. So when I set up this center, you can't do everything. And so I really had to think very, very hard about what technologies would be the most appropriate ones for a center like this, for a Research One environment, for someone who has been around virtual reality since the late 1990s, and I'm fully aware of not only the trajectory of consumer technologies, but also those that deal with some of the things that are happening in the entertainment and the business industries. So when I think about digital humanities, and when I think about the ways that often we have a very negative perception research-wise about the humanities, and when we think about digitizing the humanities, we have a very narrow perception about what that really means, right? Think about what comes to your mind when you think about digital humanities. Now, some of you may think very broadly, but some others may not necessarily think as broadly as perhaps you're going to experience here. So when I set this center up, I wanted to think about the various technologies that would be not only within this growth area, but that would be fundable, but that would also be exciting, and that would also be very important for our students to learn about. That would help them be differently marketable when they got ready to graduate, whatever field they happen to be majoring in. So I wanted to focus on immersive experiences first. We've heard so much about the metaverse. You have all heard so much about the metaverse, I'm sure. We all have different perceptions about what that is. Is it Facebook's perception of the metaverse where everybody's closed off into, some sort of virtual world? I mean, that's not the first time this has been around. It's so funny. I got to do an aside here. It's so funny whenever I see, these commercials about Meta and the Meta workspace and all these kinds of things. I'm thinking to myself, wow, we did that back in 2004 when we were doing Second Life. Some of you remember this, right? When we were doing Second Life, when we had avatars, 30, 40, 50 avatars in a space and these social events and people were getting married and we had all these activities going on and collaborations and people had islands, right? Remember all of that? Now it's so funny because when I see these commercials, it's like this is the first time this is happening. And I saw something on the news the other day where people were, surprised that these two people, connected in Meta. And I was like, oh my goodness, history repeats itself. So anyway, we did want to have at least some presence in immersive spaces. Now, that has now bifurcated, of course, because we've got such great high-resolution 360 cameras and how 360 videography has become part of the definition of full immersion. When you think about virtual reality, that's become a part of that conversation, although it wasn't when we first started working with VR. It was all computer generated. Okay, so we have a presence there, and we're working with VR and AR. We're working with automated assistants, and we'll talk a little bit about the Timmy robot here in just a few moments. We also work with augmented reality, and there are several parts to augmented reality. That it's just not one thing. AR, of course, allows you to superimpose other things on top of the real world. But what are those other things? And that's really a part of the excitement surrounding everything else when you talk about augmented reality. That's just the platform. But when you talk about then 3D scanning, or when you talk about holograms, or when you talk about volumetric video, that's all a part of the AR experience that really makes AR exciting in my opinion, right? Beyond the interactivity, of course, the MR and the mixed reality is something really cool. So we'll get into all of that here, and that's what we're doing. So when I think about spatial digital humanities, spatial is, sort of a metaphor here that we're using when you think about digital humanities, and how spatial really sort of is an expanding kind of metaphor. Think about humanities as expanding in its understanding, in its scope, in its presence, in its interactivity, in its engagement, and everything about the humanities getting larger, getting deeper, getting, all in many ways becoming 3D. Okay, so if you think about the humanities like that, think about spatial digital humanities like this, you'll understand why we're getting into some of these technologies and connecting them with the humanities in these very, very exciting ways. When I think about immersion, I mentioned earlier that immersion has taken on a number of different forms. And of course, when we first started working with virtual reality, immersion really meant one thing, and that meant computer-generated environment where you're putting on, or you are surrounded by some sort of digital or digital space, and you're able to navigate your way through that space because it's digital and it's 3D, okay? And sometimes you're even able to interact with others or with that space itself. It's now become something a little bit different as far as immersive technologies, and that has included 360 videography and 360 imagery. And when I think about the way that when the pandemic hit, everyone was trying to figure out, particularly those in the museum and the art gallery space, but also other spaces, how are we going to get our visitors back? How are we going to get people back in here when we can't get people back in here physically, right? So face masks was one thing, but before people could go out, when all these spaces were closed, 360 videography and imagery really took on, and 360 tours really took on a whole new level. And when you think about being able to, and I'm clicking on the Poetry Center tour now, when you think about being able to tour a space and be able to look around and interact with it in so many different ways, the Poetry Center has been so kind as to allow us to really be able to capture that space, and we're going to be incorporating different levels of interactivity into this space to include maybe some holograms or whatever the case might be. So it's going to be really exciting to be able to explore spaces like the Poetry Center. If you'll click also then on the Legacy Museum, this is another space that we scanned at Tuskegee University. This is a space where Henrietta Lacks's cells are. There's a huge exhibit there. They have all these beautiful dioramas that you'll see on the first floor there as you click around just a little bit. So when you think about capturing spaces and digital twins, this is all a part of what digital humanities has become when you begin to spatialize the understanding of spaces, when you begin to think about how you might experience a culture, how you might be able to experience, say, a language in various ways. So these virtual tours are facilitated by 360 videography and images and videos. You can get to various videos that you want to link together. You don't just have one big video, you have several smaller videos, and you can connect them through portals. And so you can never have to, sort of exit the experience if it's built correctly. These experiences can also contain hotspots and various forms of interactivity, thus making the digital twin in some ways more informative than the real world, because in the real world you might not have an information sign that you can click on that gives you a drop down that gives you more information about whatever it is that you've just clicked on. You got to wait and ask somebody, or you might have to know about what that thing is. So digital twins and 360 videography and virtual tours have become something of a very interesting experiential technique that many have incorporated as a part of the learning and the experiential sort of experience here. Now, when you think about how these technologies can bring people together and bring projects and spaces to life, this is where we really get into some interesting programming. We get into some interesting aspects of lighting and videography and cinematography and photography. All the things that you might not necessarily consider are very important when putting together these kinds of things. Now, you might also want to click on a little bit later on a couple of projects that we did. One is Flipper's Memories. This is Henry Flipper, member of the Buffalo Soldiers, one of the earlier, I think the first graduate of West Point. And so we have a bit of his life as told through the Arizona State Historical Society Museum and one of its curators there. So when you think about how we can bring these spaces to life by connecting video and images and interactives, these two projects, the Presidio project and Flipper's Memories, are two very good ones. And as I'm describing them, our host is probably clicking through a couple of these so you can see some of the ways that not only high resolution video allows us to look in various directions, but also allows us to transport back in time and be able to see some very, very interesting things that were put together for our benefit. Now, when you think about how you put these together, I always love to be transparent because you might say, well, how do you do that? What equipment do you need? How do you do a virtual tour? Well, it's important to empower everybody here. So you can see just some of the equipment that we use. We use Insta360 Pro 2 cameras. We have access to a Matterport 2 camera, and the Matterport 3 camera just came out a couple of days ago. So it's interesting, I got to replace that picture or at least supplement it when we have access to one. We use spatialized or 360 microphones that capture audio from vast distances and in different directions. We also use high resolution and high frame rate 360 video cameras so we can capture not only very fine details but also very, very fast movement. So when you think about the importance of the ways that video and audio are put together now and how important they are to work together to create a fully featured immersive experience, we try to do our best to make sure that all of those things are in place. So we also have to use a platform to do these things. And when you think about creating the experience, you have to have some place to host it. We use an application, a platform called 3D Vista to do our hosting. We also use Matterport's platform because if you use their camera, you're kind of stuck in their ecosystem. But also all these other platforms are either free or very, very low cost for someone that wants to sort of jump into this and not pay a very, very high subscription cost or get into a lot of very expensive equipment. So when you think about getting into this notion of immersive technologies, there is a lower hanging fruit that you can get into now that will create some very, very compelling experiences for our students. Computer-generated virtual reality is a slightly different animal. It's one where you have to start off with a bit more expertise to create the experience. You have to have a bit different type of technology in order to host or in order to not only develop the experience, but also to experience the experience, whether it be a higher powered VR headset or some sort of gaming computer that will handle the high resolution graphics. When you think about computer-generated virtual reality, though, it's really quite amazing, and it can be really quite good. The Virtual Harlem Project, as I mentioned to you earlier, is one that I've been working on since the late 1990s, and I'm going to let you watch a part of this. I'm going to go still for a second while you watch this, and then when you see me click over here, then we can stop the video. So there we go. And you should be able to hear the audio. So the Virtual Harlem Project, as you can see here, was developed in, the late 1990s. It's one that basically allows us to, its intention was to recreate a portion of Harlem, New York as it existed in the 1920s jazz age. I wanted my students to be just as excited about an environment and a period that I was when teaching the classes there. Now, this environment was really designed to take students not only back in time, but allow them to play roles, allow them to serve as, sort of a third-person observer about various conversations, events, or activities that may be taking place in locations like the Cotton Club or Small's Paradise or in front of the Abyssinian Baptist Church or whatever the experience may happen to be. So we created this space to be contributory, but also to be experiential and one that would be research-oriented. It's still under development, very, very exciting. This past semester, I had a number of students from Indiana University that played a part in some redevelopment or upgrading of the Virtual Harlem project. This is where it started back in 1998. And in spring 2021, you see its evolution. They really did an amazing job. And as students continue to not only contribute to this technically, but also contribute to it content-wise, this is going to become an experience that will one day not only become a digital twin, but also become maybe an alternate classroom for those that are teaching history or Harlem Renaissance classes or literature classes of the time of the period. So when I think about the power of these virtual worlds, full immersion really gives us an opportunity to mimic the benefits that we have when we travel abroad, or when we encourage our foreign language students to go study abroad, because that's really how you're going to really fully understand the culture that you're trying to learn more about. Getting back to my presentation here. Here we go.
Wonderful. This is John Wu. Yes, thank you very much again for doing this. When you call my name, I really feel you're here, so I want to hug you. Yeah, thank you very much. And you have done this amazing job. And what's the conceptual challenge? Yesterday, I think you were in another panel. I asked a question about data. So you're actually creating lots of new materials, or we call it data or data set. So what is your sense of the nature of this kind of, of data?
Yes, I think part of the challenge is that because doing live holograms, that hopefully we may be able to get up and running, but doing a live hologram is ephemeral, and recording this can be captured in a number of different ways. And so by thinking about that sort of data, whether it's screen capture or whether it's some other sort of capture format that is then remade available via a code that those options is not working, then say students or someone who missed the live broadcast would not be able to see it. So we have to think of ways to capture ephemeral data that is a little bit challenging to capture in traditional ways.
Hopefully we'll get a better connection here. Wow. We can make him big and small.
Professor, can you say that again?
Yes, I was asking if there are any further questions.
Hi, Professor. How are you? Hello, Professor. Can you hear me? Okay, wonderful. Thank you for your presentation. We're all very, very impressed. One question, since you're really keeping up with your technology, do you work with new vendors that they will set you up as a beta site? And what kind of difficulty are you running through those new vendors? Thank you.
Can you repeat that, Jeffrey, please?
Since you're involved in in all of these new technologies, do the technology companies help you and allow you to be a beta tester for some of the equipment and software?
Yes. Well, yes and no. They allow us to have discounted subscription rates for some of the research that we're doing. Because much of what we're doing is not commercial,
we are able to take advantage of discounted rates because we're not commercializing any of these products.
Oh, do they offer technical support if there are problems?
And so we're both beta testing as well as use case testing many of these technologies. So the customer support is fantastic, usually within 24 hours, if not sooner, sometimes even same day. They'll hop on a phone call or a video conference and help us troubleshoot things. We're still going through some troubleshooting things with one of our platforms, and they are always available to conference with our developer. So yes, the customer support is fantastic with these products.
My next question is, how do you incorporate the new technology like this into your teaching so that students can benefit and they can create more solutions using their tools? How long would it
Yes, that's a
take?
great question. That's a great question. A lot of the technologies, like for instance, this application is free. And so students are introduced to this near the beginning of the semester as one of the options that they may use as one of their presentations that they're doing for the class. So making sure that there are clear and explicit instructions on how students can do things, but also making sure that in addition to that, they have examples of how these technologies have been used in the past. And of course, making sure that they're free or very, very low cost as an option for students to use as part of their presentation to present their understanding of the course content. So everything that we do with the technology is an effort for them to use different modes of presentation to basically display their understanding of wherever that content happens to be.
And my last question is, are your students very curious about new technology? Are they excited or are they confused?
That's a great question too. It depends on the ease of use. Now I found that when I first started using, say, 360 cameras some years ago, the ease of use was not really there. And students found that it was just much easier to pull out their phone and take a picture as opposed to pull out their 360 camera and go through 8 steps before they can even take a picture. So the ease of use, as that comes down, the use of the technology goes up. Also, making sure that students have a very, very good example of how that technology can be used. If they don't see a good example, then they'll typically tend to gravitate towards things that they're familiar with or that they've used in the past.
We have another question coming up from it.
Okay.
Great.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor, for your wonderful presentation. I'm wondering, from your experience, what's the successful rate in terms of making the balance between focus on technology versus the conceptual or fundamental understanding for the student in your teaching?
The question, right? You were asking what my measures of success are for the use of these technologies in the classroom or for students using them. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm assuming the technology is in the implementation side, actually using the new means, but also underneath is the conceptual framework or the theoretical foundation. How, your experience, successful experience, to balance those two parts in your teaching?
That's a great question. My first book outlines why we use certain technologies in certain cases. So when you're thinking about something that is, say, a visually oriented technology, I would tend to connect that with visually oriented content that is a part of my class. So for instance, if we're studying literature, you might not think that's visual, but it can be because the words describe what maybe the author has imagined in her or his mind as a setting. So a likely tool to use would be maybe a 360 camera that captures that particular setting in the best way possible, and then let's make it interactive. Or if they're doing, say, a hologram, like this free application, and they want to leave their mark, say, around the city. they would need to be able to do that in a way that would be descriptive of whatever the setting is that they happen to be leaving their mark or their stigma on. So the theoretical concept behind the choice of whatever the technology happens to be for my teaching or that students may use as options for their presentations all deal with the mode or the connection that it has to the content. So for instance, if I'm going to be teaching something about music in class, I might have students learn about a podcasting application, or I might have them learn about a music development or a music composition application that will allow them to do very similar things that, say, the composers in our music section may have to be doing. So thinking of ways that they can mimic or at least pair the technology to the content really gives us the theoretical background of the basis as to why we choose that particular technology.
I think we probably have time for one more question.
Thank you. Just one last question, Brian. This is John Wu from Center for Police Studies. Thank you again. So I think your presentation is wonderful, and we see you. I think in the room, lots of people want to collaborate with you for future projects. Like we're going to move into a new building next year, Dr. Andrew Wells Center for Integrated Medicine. So we want to create something like you did for the Poetry Center, for example. So we have a real-world problem here. So what's the average cost of doing something like that? The 360 virtual reality tour of our new building.
Yes, so it depends. So if you're talking about full volumetric video capture, it depends on the number of cameras that you want to use based on the quality that you're trying to get. Typically, the more cameras up to a certain point will give you better quality, which will require a bit more space. It also dictates or depends on what you want your actor or your performers to do within a predefined space. Right now, our space is about 14 by 14 square feet, with the interior being about 10 by 10 square feet, and the acting square being about 1 square meter. So people have about that much room. So you figure, depending on what you want your people to do, depending on the number of cameras or the quality, that will dictate the space. Now, what we're doing here, I've got maybe 4 feet of space, and I'm about 1.5 feet, maybe 2 feet away from my camera. So you don't need very much space here. And interestingly enough, I'm not using a green screen this time. I'm not sure how the artifact is around my figure, but you can imagine that the technology is continuing to improve. And so as that evolves, fewer and fewer space requirements are going to be necessary if you're doing prosumer level things. Now, once you get into the professional stuff that you heard Volumetric doing, much more space. But for what we're doing, it's not that much as far as space requirements. Now, as far as computing requirements, we're talking at least 10 grand for your machine and about $400 per camera and about $100, $150 per cable for each camera. And then you have to get specialized cards and a specialized graphic card for your PC. So we're talking about a bit of money, but nothing near as much as the amount that Volumetric puts into their production level studio. I would say our studio was under $50,000 to set up, and then of course we have students that are developers who are part of that setup.
Thank you.
Okay.
I do apologize for the technical errors, but I'm in a different location. I'm in Cleveland for a film festival, and my students and I are doing an XR demonstration, which is where we are now, while you might hear some background music or what have you. So we're waiting for participants to come over, that we try on a number of headsets and doing some things. And that's a part of the film festival's attempt to move into the XR space, in addition to the traditional film. So I do apologize for the errors, but I hope you at least got something out of the presentation and the keynote. And thank you so much for your attention and your patience.
Thank you very much, Dr. Carter. Thanks for bearing with us as we work out the bugs here.